There's nothing quite like a perfectly written action scene in a book. I love the way a great action scene can get you leaning forward in your seat, get your heart racing, get your blood pumping, and leave you breathless by the end. But for every wonderful action scene that I have read in my many years as a reading fan, I've also read my fair share of not so great action scenes that are confusing or muddy or, God forbid, boring. So in this video, I'm going to be interviewing and discussing the art of writing a great action scene with none other than best-selling author Andy Peloquin. I couldn't think of anyone better to invite on to give his take and expertise on writing action scenes, because Andy really is a master of action scenes across his many series, from the Dark Blade series to the more recent Silent Champions. One thing you know for sure when you get a hold of one of his books is that you are in for some really fantastic action scenes. So I was so excited to have him on the channel to discuss his approach to writing them, some do's and some don'ts, and I'm sure that by the end of this interview and conversation that we've had, you will have a whole new take on how to incorporate writing better and more gripping and more engaging action scenes in your books. So let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Story Castle. Andy, thanks so much for being on with us. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. I wanted to do a talk with an author about action scenes because I think it's a really interesting topic, and you were definitely the first person I thought of. So I was really glad when you said yes, because I was like, I hope Andy will say yes, because you're so good at it and you have a lot to say about it, I think. So.
I was really hoping you would talk to me about like the romance side of things, because that's the sort of thing that readers expect when they read my books.
How do you pull at the heartstrings? So yes. How do you work your magic on us? Yeah, so we're going to be talking about action scenes from a couple different angles. I know you and I are both fantasy authors. Not everyone who's watching is a fantasy author, but I one of the things I hope we can talk a little bit about today is the function of an action scene and sort of break it down a little bit more. The first question I had for you, maybe to kick it off, was can you talk just a little bit about what you think a good action scene brings to a book? Like, why include them? And what does it do when it's present, assuming that it's working well, and then we can get into like maybe what it looks like when it's not working well.
Yeah, so an action scene is something that you include in a book to, number one, keep the more active-brained readers reading. I don't know about you, but if I go through a book and it's 20,000 words, 30 chapters, and there is no action scene, I'm going to get a little bit bored. And action can be anything. It can be anything that gets your heart racing, gets your pulse spiking a little bit, whether it's, a good chase scene. That's why they do it in every single movie. Or, combat, or literally anything that's got sort of this high tension, high adrenaline situation. It's there to keep readers engaged, because every single book and every single chapter and every single paragraph, in essence, is this sort of high and low. It's this crest and dip. Yeah. So you need those highs to make those lows really compelling. If it's all low or it's all high, it doesn't go anywhere. So you use the action scenes to, here's something quick to give you that adrenaline rush, and that keeps your body physically engaged, which keeps your mind engaged in the story, so that you get that up, and then when you go down to those little small quiet moments, it's a lot more compelling.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're talking about sort of the physical act of reading, because it is a very like a full-bodied act. But we tend to think about it as a mental thing or an imaginative thing. But good action scenes do that. They get your adrenaline going. They get your serotonin going. They get your body more fully engaged in the story in ways that other scenes maybe don't always do. So that's a really good point.
And the truth is that literally every genre has its thing. Thrillers, it will get, it's literally a thrilling feeling. You'll get this adrenaline rush. A romance, it hits all the exact same brain parts that you would deal with when having a romantic interlude with your partner. It's why these genres, they're so addicting, is because they hit that. And so for me, as a person who loves activity, right, snowboarding, martial artist, paddleboarding, kayaking, action is a lot of my life, but I don't want to be active all day long. I want to sit back and read and relax. But if I get this badass book that's filled with tons of action, I get to sort of simulate the rush, that heart-pounding, fast-paced feeling of action in my life, but I get to be relaxing at the same time. It's kind of like the best of both worlds.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that I completely agree with that. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense as an author to put yourself in the space of always thinking about the reader and the reader's experience, and like respecting their time and attention,
Yeah.
and thinking about not just the words on the page or even the action of the story, but the way that the different parts of the story help your reader's experience, which is really what
Yeah.
you're going for ultimately.
Absolutely. And so honestly, some of the best books that I've ever read have had super minimalist battle scenes, but because they were written so well and the way that they were crafted, the action was so compelling, I loved it. By comparison, I've read books that are just nonstop blood and guts and violence, and there was
Sure.
nothing compelling about them because of the way that they were crafted. As we're going to get into, I'm sure that the way that an action scene of any sort is crafted is super important to drawing in the reader.
Absolutely. Um, and obviously, I think certain genres are known more for having action scenes, and even like the reader expectation within those genre fans is like you're gonna get a magical duel or a sword fight or a spaceship battle, or like certain genres have that baked in. Do you think that there are ways that that genres that less traditionally incorporate action might benefit from finding ways of doing it? Like we've mentioned, a romance or other kinds, or is it really like it fits in certain spaces and it just doesn't belong in other spaces?
Well, again, it goes back to that thing of action takes many forms, right? In fantasy, you've got magical duels, you've got sword fights, you've got all that stuff, but there are plenty of fantasies where there's nothing actually going on in the thing. Maybe the character is wrestling with some magic that they're trying to learn, but because of the way that the magic is interfering with or affecting their body, it feels like an action scene. There's this struggle,
Mm,
there's this tension, there's this stress, right? Take that, switch that to romance. With romance, it's this back and forth witty banter between the two characters. You could call the meet cute sort of the opening battle scene of a
sure.
romance novel,
Yeah, I
right?
like that.
Because it's not sort of static or plain. Like you have those sort of the one note happy moments, right, where the two characters are doing the romantic ride through Central Park on horseback and real lovey-dovey and building up that thing. Whereas that moment when all of a sudden there's that clash that leads to
Yeah,
their inevitable breakup, that is an action scene in the form of romance. In a
yeah,
thriller, the detective is it's going to be small action, right? He's going to be looking at the thing, but then he's going to be like, "Oh my God, I've got to go and deliver this thing there." Or, if you watch any of these shows like FBI or NCIS, right? The character that they're going to talk to runs, so they have to chase him, right? It's a
mm-hmm.
short action scene, but it's there. So every single genre has their own flavor of action. We just sort of we I would say me as a fantasy reader, reader and author, think of it more in terms of physical action. But there's all kinds of action that really
Sure.
you need. You need those ups, whether it's triggering the romance side of your brain or the thriller side of your brain, whatever it is, there needs to be those
Yeah.
ups.
So maybe one way we could almost define an action scene is any scene with that is fast paced with high conflicts and something at stake.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
if you've got those elements together, it's producing that effect as you're reading the scene because things are moving quickly. It's a little
Yeah,
bit that roller coaster part where it's like this is the downhill part or the loop part where everything's going just a little faster than you have time to stop and process it,
yeah,
and the sense of danger, but like you said, not necessarily physical danger. It might be relational danger. It might be
yeah.
identity danger, psychological danger, or whatever. There's something on the line here, and things are moving fast. So I've got to like really stay in it while I
Yeah.
see what happens. Yeah,
Exactly. So in your average, I'm going to say average scene, the ups and downs are much more gradual, right? It's this sort of slow peak and arc, right? Whether it's the happy moment or the sad moment. With an action scene, it's all close together. So it can kind of go like this,
yeah,
super fast, and that is what makes your heart, that physical reaction because it's will they, won't they, just a lot faster and closer together.
yeah. I love that. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about kind of just defining action a lot more broadly than a duel or whatever in particular. What do you think makes a bad action scene? Like, because they exist and we've all
Yeah.
experienced them. Where it's like, I shouldn't be bored right now, but I'm kind of bored, or maybe I'm just confused. Or what are the things that you think, at least in your experience, maybe as a reader, that you would define as like that's not a great action scene?
So when everything is too one note, in the sense that there's no ups and downs, right? A great battle scene is I'm coming to kill you. Holy shit, you're coming to kill me. Aha, I get the advantage and now I'm coming to kill you guys. But wait a minute. Like that, it's kind of this push and pull.
Yeah,
It's much more dynamic. You never know what's going on. Whereas a battle scene that's very one note, that everything kind of is going one character's way, right? Whether it's the bad guy is clearly going to win and then he
sure,
wins, or the good guy's going to win and then he wins with no real danger. That's kind of boring. Like, you can use those scenes to highlight other aspects, but there's got to kind of be some sort of conflict, whether it is a physical conflict, a psychological conflict, a magical conflict. There has to be conflict. So a great example would be any badass overpowered character who is clearly killing their way through an entire army of bad guys, but then inside their head or inside their magical being, there's some struggle, right? Whether it's the evil spirit that's empowering them with magic is trying to take over, so there's this push and
sure,
pull. There has to be some kind of push and pull, otherwise, it's just this kind of one note, and it gets boring when you have
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Um, Another thing is not really hitting the highs and the lows. So as a writer, I tend to go very graphic because for me, that is how I will experience those highs, right? Or the lows. You want to feel a character's excitement at something, you show it in big detail, right? You want to feel their horror, you show it in big detail. You want to feel like they're winning, you show them mowing through the bad guys. You want to show them losing, you feel their pain, you see their comrades dying, you feel that loss, like everything is big. Whereas if it's just like back and forth and haha, we're gonna win, and sort of like had in Princess Bride, had there not been that witty banter between
yeah,
Wesley and Inigo Montoya, it would have been a very, very sort of one note repetitive scene. But because you have this kind of witty repartee, this back and forth very visibly, all that really fast, not very visible sword fighting stuff is so enjoyable.
yeah. I think one of the rules that not rules but principles that I learned years ago in a workshop that was really helpful. The person who was teaching the workshop when they were talking about writing action was like, remember that no matter how fast the external action of your scene is moving, your mind always moves faster. So you always have room to slow down and show the reader how your character is experiencing what's happening, how they feel about it, what they think about it, if they're all if they're hopeless, if they're feeling tired because their muscles are wearing out or their breath is coming hard. Like, stop and take a sentence or five to show that it can feel like that. Well, there's no time for that because it's moving so fast, but our brains always move faster, and giving, even within, like you said, I like the metaphor of like a faster oscillation, still making sure that it's like this little physical exchange just happened, and the protagonist is losing hope that anything will work on time because the allies should have rolled in by now and they haven't, so what's wrong, but I'm gonna keep fighting anyway. But like having
Yep.
those opportunities for the reader to still have a rhythm, and it's like
Exactly.
you said, it's not just monotone. I think is
And
critical.
so those breathless highs when everything is happening fast, right? Sentences are choppy, short, maybe even, fragmented sentences, because that kind of conveys the tone of the battle, how, impossible it is to keep track of everything. You get a little bit of that, you get them breathing and, okay, they're excited, and then you bring them down a little bit. And then you kind of keep doing this building, and dropping and dropping and dropping repeatedly until they end the battle scene and they realize their hands are a little sweaty and their heart's
Mm-hmm.
beating a little bit faster, and they're like that
Maybe
is
they're
a good
missing a
battle scene.
limb.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think you're right. For me, one of the other things I've identified as, like, I think this This to me feels like bad action scene. It's sort of the literary equivalent of too much shaky cam in an action movie,
Yeah.
where it's like, just because chaos is happening does not mean that it's interesting or that I have
Yeah.
context to follow what's happening. And it's easy to just sort of throw spaghetti of actions
Yeah.
on the page, but really trying to make sure that you have a clear through line for your reader's sort of mental eye to follow.
Yeah.
Even down to something as simple as, like, describe the action and then the response to the action. So not like
Yeah.
Greg slumped to the floor when he got punched in the face, because that makes me roll back and wait, wait, why? But, like, he was punched in the face and slumped to the floor. Like,
Yeah.
things like that where your author is clearly paying attention to what they want you focusing on, so that you have something to kind of hang your hat on, and it's not just shaky cam. It's for lack of a better word, because I can't stand that in movies. It's like, don't blur the action with all these weird jump cuts, and it's like, it's just a ride, but it's not a narrative anymore.
Yeah. Another example of a bad action scene is an unnecessary one.
Ooh,
So okay, so I write badass half demon assassin, lots of murderation and death and all that kind of stuff. Tons of fun. But if I wrote every single fight that he fights, they could get boring and repetitive after a while. So one example that I will use from my own writing is in the latest book, Awakener, the 6th book in the Darkblade series. The hunter has fought a bunch of different people, and then he's going back to kind of fight one of those people again. We know what's going to happen. We know who the enemy are, what they look like, the way that they fight. We know their tactics. What we don't need to have that again. So what I do is I have the hunter charging, and then the hunter standing in the middle of the aftermath. Because really everything that happens between that, it's going to be the exact same sort of push and pull. You know, the guy swung for him, he blocked, he swung back, dead, more people coming. You know, there's kind of repetitive nature to it. But you cut that out, you show everything that happens up until the moment of combat and then afterward, and you still maintain the through line of action like the internal action, right? What he's going through as he's charging into battle, and then what he's going through as he's coming out of it. You maintain that action without all the filler in between. Now, every other battle that you want to show, you can. But if there's any battle that feels unnecessary, that's when you can almost skip the action and get straight. You can just keep it the meat of what the character is feeling.
Yeah. Almost asking, like, what's the point of this action scene as its own thing? Like, why does it deserve to exist and be fully shown, as opposed to just indicated? And we get to the outcomes, which is really what matters. We need the scene because we need the outcomes, so jump to that.
Well, so that kind of begs the question, what is the purpose of an action scene? And an action scene, on the one side, is to keep readers engaged because we all like action. But the other half of an action scene is showing who the character is through their choices and their actions. So in the beginning of the Darkblade series, the opening scene, the character, he cuts his way through a port full of enemy mercenaries and sailors to kill someone, right? The entire point of this action scene was to show the preparation that goes into it, the way that he responds when he is faced with, 18 times more enemies, 20 to 1.
Right.
How he deals when he gets shot in the chest, a fatal wound, right? What happens when it looks like the odds are super stacked against him to the point of impossibility? What does he do? How does he react? How does he plan? How does he think and feel about all of this stuff? Action is a vehicle to show the character, and any action scene that fails to develop the character is a missed opportunity. It's just like every single conversation, every single quiet moment, every single setting. Everything in a novel is about the character. So whether throws a punch, swings a sword, shoots a bow, unleashes some sort of magic, every single action that they take or they choose not to take shows who they are. So action scenes are done, they're put in there to show some new aspect of the character or to further develop or cement some aspect of the character. So if an action scene, going back to the previous thing, if an action scene doesn't serve in some way to show you more about the character, or you don't need to show in that scene, cut it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could not possibly agree more, especially when you're really drilling into the critical issue, which is a story is about a character's growth and change and transformation in response to a series of unbelievable circumstances, like a
Yeah.
set of things. And what really makes it interesting is, how is this character different now, and why did that happen? Because that's partly how we learn about ourselves and about our world and all that other good stuff. So really drilling in to say it's not just about because things need to happen for the plot, but how are they different at the end of the scene than they were at the beginning in some way, or how has the reader been given an opportunity to learn something different about them?
Yeah. Or why do they choose to remain the same? Because that is literally any choice, whether to go, a different way or do the same thing, it reveals more about the characters. I mean, if you look at people who are, drug addicts, alcoholics, they continue to do these same destructive patterns time after time after time. Why? I don't understand it as not a recovering drug addict or alcoholic. So if I read a story about someone and I see why this sort of repetitive pattern of self-destruction is done, it helps me understand them better. Yeah. And that's what reading is really all about. So if I show the character making the same choice or the different choice, but it's based on new information, maybe the way that they respond to the new information and still go the same way tells you just as much about their character as new information, new way. And so everything is about these little moments where they make a choice in one direction or another. And that's what an action scene is about doing. It's the same reason, why am I lifting my sword to block instead of lowering my sword to block? It's because the character, I see new information coming at me from up above instead of from down below. When maybe in the past he came at me from down below. So maybe I'm not going to raise my sword. I'm going to dodge when I blocked before. Why am I doing this? Everything is a vehicle to demonstrate the character's choices, not necessarily growth, because growth can come about in ways that are unpredictable, or they don't even happen until the end of the book, but the choices show who they are, and it leads you down this journey that eventually will take you to the stage of growth.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And this is dovetailing on one of the other questions I wanted to ask and talk a little bit about, which is, obviously action scenes by definition are more external than internal, at least as a starting point, because the whole point is it's a moment when a lot of things are happening all at once in some way or another. But I personally think that the best action scenes move as much on the internal track as they do externally. So how do you work at building narrative into your action scenes so that it isn't just moments when stuff happens but the story isn't happening, if that makes sense? How do you work at that challenge? Because it can be easy to fill in a lot of page count with the stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you're not really covering as much time as you would in other kinds of scenes. So just talk a little bit about how you approach carrying the story forward in an action scene.
Okay, so I think the reason that my books end up being as long as they do is because I take so much time to build everything else up to get to the action scene. So let's say the hunter is fighting a demon, right? It's not the opening scene of the book where he's walking down the street, a demon jumps on him, he fights dead. It's taken chapters upon chapters to explain why he hates demons, why a demon who might have been his ally is going to be his enemy, everything about him and his choices and his fighting style and his armor and his cool tricks and all that. So by the time you actually get to the action scene, you know everything else that's happening around it. So then when the hunter gets into it, really you only need to do maybe 80% action and 20% internal. Or, depending on the kind of action, you can really do 50-50 or even 20% external and 80% internal, because the stage has been set. I think that's probably the number one piece of advice for any kind of writer building up to an action scene, except for the kind of action scene that you use when first introducing your character. You use that to show who they are, and then you continue on showing who they are afterward in the quieter moments. But when you're already in a book, when you've already met a character, when you know a little bit about the world and all of that, you have to set the stage. You have to make sure that you understand who the enemy is or why they're an enemy. Maybe it's a faceless, a masked person that you don't know, but you need to understand about the character then. If you know who the enemy is, you have to understand why this enemy is, so that those things, the choices and the decisions and the things that happen, have impact. An example would be the opening scene of the Silent Champion series. It's a massacre. The captain's whole company gets slaughtered right in front of him. Now you can say, Captain, you assume he's an officer, so he cares for the men under him. You could just get away with that. Mm-hmm. But then through the actions that he takes, he's holding up some guy who's about to die, or he throws himself in the path of someone who's about to get killed. You show who the character is. And then all of a sudden there's this moment where the guy who's standing in front of him dies, and the body falls and the way is clear, and you see the enemy looming up in front of him. And this is an opportunity for the internal to come through. How does the captain respond to this enemy who's definitely going to kill him right up in front of him? Mm-hmm. And then he goes and he does, then the action goes external again, and then he gets shot in the arm. And what does he do? How do you go to the internal, you show the pain response and the being flung around. And then does he pick himself up? Does he stay down? How does he, and so it's this kind of, it's sort of like you would have the push and pull between the I'm winning, I'm losing. You're going to have that same sort of push and pull between the external and the internal.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great explanation. And really, part of what I'm kind of taking away from the subtext of a lot of what you're saying is, like, be clear about why your characters are fighting. Don't just have them, or even if it's not, if it's fighting in a conversation or whatever, however you're structuring your action, what's in it for them, or what's on the line, and as much as possible make it about more than just surviving, because that's a given in almost all cases. Like, I just don't want to die, but what else? Because when you can have a clear this is what's at stake, then everything, like, I think the John Wick movies do this really well, especially the first one, because their action scenes are really long and they're very technical and external, and they're great fun to watch. But, like, the emotional investment is because by the time you get there, you're so on his side for, like, what this world-weary assassin who just wanted to get out and like live in peace, and that's being threatened, and so there's like identity stuff on the line. Yeah, that's more compelling than just not getting shot as a motive. Exactly.
Or
in it.
Another really good example that just popped into my head is Ong Bak. Yeah. It's a Muay Thai movie. I do not speak a word of Thai, right? So I don't think I even watched half of the movie, because I was just like, okay, here's the cool Muay Thai fight scenes. But by the time we get to this end scene, he's just discovered that this elephant that he's been sworn to sort of protect has been killed, and it's basically reconstructed as a skeleton. You get 5 minutes of this dude basically breaking joints. It's just snap, crackle, pop for 5 straight minutes. Way too long. Yeah. But you see the pain in his face as he's going through this, because you know exactly why he's doing this drawn out fight sequence. And so it has a lot more impact than maybe the earlier sequences where he's, fighting goons in the streets. There are direct stakes. There's direct impact to him. And it makes that final scene so much more visceral than what happens before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Either protecting something, preserving something, or a lot of times identity thing. Avenging, because avenging is about identity. It's like, this act has happened. How I respond to it will have a lot to say about who I am and how I see myself in the aftermath of this thing. I can't have peace if kind of thing. So all of those things are really significant stakes that then it just makes the action relevant. Instead of just exciting, which is cool, but exciting only goes so far.
Yeah. The other side of the action conversation is the impact, right? So we've talked a lot about building everything up to the action scene so that you see in the moment what the character does. But the fallout of the action scene always has to have some kind of impact on the character, whether they lose someone, whether they kill the wrong person, whether it leads to the discovery of some secret, whether it teaches them something new about themselves, or that it's a mistake, or whatever it is. You've got all this build-up going on, you've got this moment of peak action, but then if you don't bookend it with an impact of any sort, that is another action scene that just boop, falls flat.
Yeah. So some takeaway questions to ask yourself as you're planning an action scene. What is going to be revealed about my character in this scene? I.e., like, why does it deserve to be in the book?
Yeah.
What is the character? What's at stake for the character that's more than just survival? And if you can't figure that out, like, make something. Like, make there be a reason that losing would be real bad, or because sometimes it's you can survive and still not win. So, like, what's at stake? And then, as you're saying, what's the impact of this action sequence going to be on the other side? Like, how will the world of the character and the character cast of characters be different on the other end of it? If you can answer those three questions, I think you're really well equipped to write not just a fun action scene, but a really important one that like has impact and relevance in the story, and that readers come away from going, wow, I remember that. Like, I think about it after I read it. It's not just, punch and kick filler number 7.
Yeah. Which can be fun. I do like punch and kick filler number 7.
I mean, but the more you do that, the more you're relying on a certain kind of genre appreciation, or a certain, you know what I mean? Like, I watch bad action movies because I enjoy them.
Oh yeah.
But a movie like Hero, I can get someone who doesn't like action movies to watch that. And be floored by it because it does all of those things so well. Whereas a lot of other ones, it's like, if you're not into this genre, you're just not going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
If you like the trappings, you'll have fun.
Yeah.
And I think, like, why not aim a little higher if you have the chance to do so? And now that you've watched this video, you have the chance to do so. So that's great.
I think a big reason that John Wick was so wildly successful was because you didn't just have those highly technical action scenes, which are spectacular. You do not get many movies and TV shows with such technical combat. But you also have the moment of John Wick standing over the grave of his dead wife, and then you see the way that he's tender with the dog. And then you have the guy saying the myth of Baba Yaga and why he's so terrifying. And you have all this build-up around it that makes those moments, when he does this badass fighting thing, so impactful.
Yeah. Yep. I don't think there's anything wrong with aiming to take a little John Wick and incorporate it into whatever you're doing, even if even if there aren't guns blazing. But yeah. Well, Andy, thanks so much for being on. I learned a lot from this. This was a really fun conversation. I really appreciate your time. And
thanks for having me,
guys. As you're watching this, if you have questions, drop them in the comments. We'll try and answer them as we go along. If there's more you'd like to learn or hear about, and maybe if there's enough of them, we can have Andy back on for a follow-up at some point in the future.
Woohoo!
Yeah! All right, that's it for now.